I never thought a simple family picnic would be the moment everything changed. The spring breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and blooming cherry blossoms across the park, a stark contrast to the darkness I'd been carrying inside for months. My husband, Richard, sat across from me on the checkered blanket, his perfectly pressed khakis and crisp blue shirt, making him look every bit the successful businessman he portrayed to the world. Next to him, his sister Lucy adjusted her designer sunglasses, their matching golden brown hair catching the sunlight. I pretended to be absorbed in arranging the sandwich platter, but my attention was razor-sharp, focused on their whispered conversation. They thought the gentle rustle of leaves would mask their words. They were wrong. "Everything's ready," Richard murmured, leaning closer to Lucy. "I've transferred all the assets to your name. The divorce papers are prepared. Once this is done, we can start our business venture." Lucy's perfectly manicured fingers gripped her wine glass tighter. "Are you sure she doesn't suspect anything?" A small smile played across my lips as I carefully wrapped up the remaining food. If only they knew what I'd discovered 3 months ago when I accidentally opened Richard's misdelivered mail. Detailed plans for their scheme to strip me of everything I'd helped build over our 15-year marriage. The irony wasn't lost on me. Richard had always underestimated me, viewing me as nothing more than the supportive wife who'd given up her career and financial planning to help him build his consulting firm. He never noticed how I'd kept my professional licenses current, maintaining connections with old colleagues who now held significant positions in legal and financial institutions. While they plotted in whispers, my mind drifted to the previous evening, when I'd finished executing my own carefully crafted plan. The movers had worked efficiently, following my detailed instructions to empty our house of everything except Richard's personal belongings. Our joint accounts had been legally secured, our assets protected through measures that would make his unauthorized transfers null and void. And waiting at our home were 2 representatives from the Financial Crimes Division, former colleagues who'd been more than interested in Richard's creative accounting practices. "What time is the meeting with the lawyers tomorrow?" Lucy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 9 a.m., Richard replied, shooting me a quick glance. I smiled warmly at him, raising my lemonade and a small toast. He'd always said my pleasant nature was one of my best qualities. I wondered if he'd still think so tomorrow. As the afternoon sun began to dip, casting long shadows across our picnic setup, I felt a strange sense of peace. The weight of discovering their betrayal, the sleepless nights spent planning my response, the careful documentation of every suspicious transaction. It all led to this moment. "Shall we head home, dear?" I asked, standing up and brushing off my sundress. "It's getting chilly." Richard nodded, helping Lucy pack up the remaining wine. They shared one last knowing look, probably thinking about how tomorrow would play out according to their plan. The drive home was quiet, with Richard humming along to the radio, his fingers tapping the steering wheel in rhythm. He looked so confident, so sure of himself. As we turned onto our street, I noticed the exact moment Richard's expression changed. Our usually well-lit house was dark, save for the porch light illuminating 2 figures in dark suits standing by the front door. The color drained from his face as he recognized one of them. Zachary Cooper, the head of the Financial Crimes Unit. "Megan," he whispered, using my full name for the first time in years. "What did you do?" I gathered my purse, feeling the weight of the documentation inside. Copies of every fraudulent transaction, every secret meeting, every planned betrayal. "I did exactly what you taught me, Richard," I replied softly. I protected our assets. Standing in our driveway, watching Richard's perfect world crumble around him, I felt neither joy nor sadness. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. Not the kind that comes from hurting others, but the strength that emerges when you finally stand up for yourself. The scene that followed would be forever etched in my memory. Richard's stammered explanations, Lucy's hasty departure, and the quiet efficiency of the Financial Crimes Unit as they presented their warrants. But what I remember most clearly was the moment I stepped into our empty house, my heels echoing against the hardwood floors, and realized that this wasn't an ending. It was my beginning. The first night in my new apartment felt surreal. I sat on the edge of my bed, surrounded by hastily unpacked boxes, while my phone buzzed incessantly with messages from mutual friends and family members. News travels fast in small circles, and Richard's arrest had already sparked a wildfire of gossip. I turned the phone off, needing space to process the whirlwind of events. My hands trembled slightly as I opened my laptop, accessing the secure folder where I'd stored everything. It had started with that misdelivered envelope, a simple twist of fate that the mailman had mixed up the numbers in our address. Inside were documents detailing an elaborate scheme. Richard and Lucy had been planning to start a competing consulting firm using our company's client list and resources. The divorce was just their way of ensuring I couldn't claim any part of their new venture. But that wasn't what hurt the most. As I dug deeper over those 3 months, I discovered something far more personal. Hidden in Richard's private email account were years of correspondence between him and Lucy, revealing a pattern of manipulation that stretched back to the early days of our marriage. They had been orchestrating my gradual withdrawal from the business, suggesting I focus on being a supportive wife, while they positioned themselves to take everything. "You're too trusting, Megan," Richard used to say, as if it were a character flaw. "That's why I handle the business side of things." I got up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. My new apartment was smaller than our house but felt more like home already. Perhaps because every item here was chosen by me, every decision made for my own well-being. The movers had followed my instructions perfectly, transferring everything of sentimental value and practical importance to this space. I'd left Richard with his clothes, his precious golf clubs, and the hollow shell of the life he'd built on lies. A knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Lisa, my oldest friend, and the only person who knew my new address. I let her in, grateful for her presence. "I brought wine and Thai food," she said, holding up 2 bags. "And I'm not leaving until you tell me everything." Over pad Thai and red wine, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. Lisa listened as I explained how I'd discovered their plan, how I'd spent months gathering evidence while maintaining a perfect facade of ignorance. "The hardest part wasn't discovering the betrayal," I confided, twirling noodles around my fork. "It was sitting across the dinner table every night, smiling and playing the role of the unsuspecting wife while knowing what they were planning." "But how did you manage to protect the assets?" Lisa asked, refilling our glasses. "Richard was always so controlling with the finances." I smiled, remembering the look of shock on Richard's face when he realized what I'd done. He forgot who he married. Before I met him, I was a rising star in financial planning. Those skills don't just disappear because you put them aside for a while. Working with my old network, I'd carefully documented every suspicious transaction, every unauthorized transfer attempt. The evidence pointed to years of financial manipulation, with Lucy acting as a willing accomplice. Richard had always insisted on keeping our business dealings in the family, but that very insularity became his downfall. "The investigators found something interesting," I continued, pulling out a folder. "Richard and Lucy weren't just planning to start a competing firm. They were already running one, using our company's resources and client relationships. Every business trip he took in the past year, he was meeting with our clients, preparing them for the switch." Lisa's eyes widened as she looked through the documents. "Megan, this is... How are you so calm about all of this?" I took a deep breath, considering her question. Because for the first time in 15 years, I'm thinking clearly. Every decision I made in our marriage was influenced by Richard's manipulation. He'd make me doubt myself, question my judgment, always with that concerned look on his face like he was protecting me from my own incompetence. Standing up, I walked to a box labeled Photos and pulled out our wedding album. The smiling couple in those pictures looked like strangers now. You know what's ironic? He and Lucy thought they were so clever, planning everything down to the last detail. But they never considered that I might be doing the same thing. The night deepened around us as I shared more details. How I'd worked with forensic accountants to trace the money trail. How I'd secured evidence of their planned corporate espionage. How I'd carefully timed everything to prevent them from destroying evidence. As Lisa prepared to leave, she hugged me tightly. "What happens now?" I walked her to the door, feeling both exhausted and strangely energized. Now, I rebuild. Not just the business, but myself. There's a board meeting tomorrow morning, and for the first time I'll be sitting at the head of the table. After she left, I stood in my new living room, surrounded by boxes waiting to be unpacked. Each one represented a piece of my old life, waiting to be reorganized into something new. My phone lay silent on the coffee table, still turned off. Tomorrow, I would face the world and its questions. Tonight, I needed this quiet moment of transition. A text notification lit up my laptop screen, an email from Lucy's husband. My heart stopped for a moment as I opened it, then started racing as I read its contents. It seemed Richard and Lucy's betrayal ran even deeper than I had imagined, and tomorrow's board meeting would be even more interesting than I had planned. Sleep eluded me that night as I read and reread the email from Tom, Lucy's husband. The attached documents revealed a shocking truth. Lucy and Richard hadn't just been planning a business betrayal. They'd been systematically draining company resources for years, hiding their tracks through a series of shell companies. Tom, an accountant himself, had stumbled upon the evidence while preparing their tax returns. "I can't stay silent anymore," his email concluded. "I've gathered everything I could find. There are more people involved, Megan. Be careful tomorrow." Morning came too quickly. I stood before my closet, deliberating over my outfit for the board meeting. Finally, I chose a charcoal gray suit I'd bought years ago, but never had the courage to wear. Richard had always insisted it was too aggressive for my position. The irony wasn't lost on me. The company's offices looked different as I walked through the glass doors at 8:30 a.m. Employees whispered and stared, quickly averting their eyes when I looked their way. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I made my way to the conference room, each step reinforcing my resolve. "Mrs. Walker?" Janet, our head of HR, intercepted me before I reached the boardroom. Her face was pale. "There's something you should know. Mr. Matthews is here." Robert Matthews, our biggest client, and according to Tom's documents, one of the key players in Richard and Lucy's scheme. I felt a flutter of anxiety in my stomach but forced a smile. Perfect timing. The boardroom fell silent as I entered. 12 pairs of eyes watched me take my place at the head of the table. Robert Matthews sat halfway down, his usual confident smirk replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady. "I'm sure you've all heard various versions of recent events. Today, we'll set the record straight." I opened my laptop and connected it to the projector. "But first, Mr. Matthews, would you like to explain why you've been meeting with my husband and sister-in-law to discuss moving your accounts to their new venture?" The color drained from his face. I don't know what you're talking about." "No?" I pulled up the first document, a series of emails between Matthews, Richard, and Lucy, discussing percentage splits and client transitions. Perhaps these will refresh your memory. "Or should we discuss the offshore accounts you've been using to hide the kickbacks?" Several board members gasped. Matthews started to stand, but I held up my hand. "Sit down, Robert. We're just getting started." For the next 2 hours, I methodically laid out everything. The years of financial manipulation, the secret meetings, the planned corporate espionage. With each revelation, I could see the shock and understanding dawn on the board members' faces. 3 board members in this room were aware of these activities, I continued, watching faces carefully. "You know who you are. You have until the end of the day to resign. After that, the evidence goes to the authorities." The tension in the room was palpable. Matthews had slumped in his chair, defeated. 2 board members wouldn't meet my eyes, while a third kept checking his phone nervously. "Now," I straightened my papers, "let's discuss the company's future. I've prepared a comprehensive restructuring plan that will not only address these issues, but strengthen our position in the market." As I outlined my vision for the company, I could feel the mood in the room shifting. Where there had been shock and scandal, now there was growing interest and even excitement. I presented clear solutions, innovative strategies, and a path forward that would protect both the company and our legitimate clients. "Any questions?" I asked as I concluded my presentation. The room was silent for a moment before Janet spoke up. "I have one. Where do I sign up?" The tension broke as several people chuckled. For the next hour, we had a productive discussion about implementing the new measures. By the time the meeting ended, 3 resignation letters sat on my desk. Exactly the board members I'd suspected. As people filed out, Matthews lingered behind. "Megan," he started, his voice lacking its usual arrogance. "We need to talk." "No, Robert, we don't." I gathered my materials calmly. "Your company's involvement in this scheme has been documented and reported to the appropriate authorities. Your new contact will be our legal team." He opened his mouth to argue but thought better of it and left silently. Alone in the boardroom, I finally allowed myself to exhale. My hands were shaking slightly as I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Richard's lawyer and a text from Tom. "There's more. Can we meet?" I was about to reply when Janet rushed back in, her face ashen. "Megan, you need to see this. Lucy just called an emergency press conference. She's going public with some accusations against you." Looking at the live feed on Janet's phone, I watched as Lucy approached a podium, her face a mask of practiced concern. But she didn't know what I had discovered in the encrypted files Tom had sent just hours before the meeting. Information that would turn her press conference into something very different from what she had planned. I smiled, picking up my phone to make a call. Sometimes the best defense is a surprise attack, and Lucy was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The company's media room was silent, except for the sound of Lucy's voice coming through the television. I sat with Janet and our legal team, watching my sister-in-law's performance. She'd always been good at playing the victim. It was one of the first things I'd noticed about her when Richard introduced us 16 years ago. "I come before you today with a heavy heart," Lucy began, her voice trembling perfectly. She wore a conservative navy dress, her hair pulled back in a modest bun, the picture of professional dignity. "What I'm about to reveal about Megan Walker isn't just about business misconduct. It's about a pattern of manipulation and deceit that has torn our family apart." I felt Janet tense beside me, but I remained calm, my finger hovering over my phone screen. Timing would be everything. "Megan has fabricated evidence against my brother," Lucy continued, her eyes glistening with well-practiced tears. "She's manipulated financial records and coerced employees into making false statements, all because she discovered Richard's plans to divorce her." I couldn't help but admire her commitment to the performance. Lucy dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as she went on to paint a picture of me as an unstable, vindictive wife who couldn't handle the end of her marriage. She spoke of documented mental health issues and concerning behavior that had worried the family for years. "Mrs. Walker," our head lawyer whispered urgently, "we should respond to these allegations immediately." I held up my hand, silently counting down from 5. Right on cue, Lucy reached the climax of her speech. "That's why, with great sadness, I must announce that we'll be filing a lawsuit against Megan Walker for corporate espionage, defamation, and—" "Now," I said quietly, pressing the button on my phone. On the screen behind Lucy, the press conference feed suddenly split, displaying emails, photos, and bank statements. Her voice faltered as she realized what was happening. These weren't just any documents. They were her private communications with Richard going back 5 years, including details of their plan and something even more damaging. "Ms. Harrison," a reporter interrupted, "could you comment on these documents that appear to show you embezzled money from your husband's medical practice to fund this venture with your brother?" The color drained from Lucy's face as she turned to look at the screen. Tom's discovery had been more significant than anyone realized. Lucy hadn't just helped Richard plan our company's downfall. She'd been stealing from her own husband's medical practice to finance it. I don't," Lucy stammered, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. Another reporter stood up. "Is it true that you and Richard Walker have been operating an unlicensed investment scheme through offshore accounts?" The questions came rapid fire now, each one revealing another layer of their deception. Lucy's hands gripped the podium as she looked desperately off stage, probably seeking guidance from her PR team. But they were as blindsided as she was. "Tom sends his regards," I murmured to the screen, thinking of Lucy's husband and his quiet determination to expose the truth. He had lost even more than I had to their scheming. The press conference devolved into chaos as Lucy attempted to regain control. "These documents are clearly fabricated," she tried. but her voice had lost its convincing tremor. "This is exactly the kind of manipulation I was talking about. Actually," a new voice cut through the chaos. Tom stepped up to the podium, placing a hand on his wife's shoulder. Lucy's eyes widened in shock. "Every document is authentic. I should know. I discovered them while preparing our taxes." The room in our office erupted in surprised murmurs as we watched this unexpected development. Tom had gone off script. We'd planned for him to release a statement later, not confront Lucy directly. "I've spent years watching you and Richard manipulate everyone around you," Tom continued, his quiet voice somehow more powerful than Lucy's emotional performance. "Megan wasn't your first victim, and she wouldn't have been your last." Lucy's composure finally broke. "Tom, please," she whispered, but her microphone caught every word. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," he replied. "And so do the federal investigators who have been reviewing my evidence for the past month." The press room exploded with questions, cameras flashing as Lucy finally fled the podium. Tom remained, calmly answering questions and providing additional context to the documents still displayed on the screen. In our office, Janet let out a low whistle. "I didn't see that coming." "Neither did Lucy," I replied, standing up. "But we're not done yet. Janet, can you call an emergency staff meeting? Everyone needs to hear the truth directly from me before the media circus gets worse." As I gathered my materials for the meeting, my phone buzzed with a text from Richard's lawyer. "My client is ready to negotiate terms." I smiled, thinking of the additional evidence still secured in my safe. "No," I typed back. "Your client is ready to confess." Looking up at the television where Tom was still speaking, I felt a sudden wave of emotion. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about every person who had ever been manipulated, gaslighted, or betrayed by someone they trusted. Today, we were all fighting back. But as I headed toward the company meeting room, a small envelope was slipped into my hand by one of the junior associates. Inside was a single photograph that made my blood run cold. A reminder that sometimes the people closest to you can hide the darkest secrets. My hands trembled as I stared at the photograph in my office. It was taken 3 years ago at our summer house in the Hamptons. Richard and Lucy stood with an unfamiliar man in a dark suit, all three smiling as they shook hands. But it was the document visible on the table in front of them that made my heart race. Blueprints for a development project I'd never seen before, with our company's logo prominently displayed. "The staff is assembled in the main conference room," Janet announced, poking her head through my door. She noticed my expression. "Megan, what's wrong?" I quickly slipped the photo into my blazer pocket. "Nothing, just processing everything." But my mind was racing. The development project in the photo matched the description of a failed venture that had cost our company millions 3 years ago. A loss Richard had blamed on market conditions. The walk to the conference room felt like moving through water. Faces turned toward me as I entered. Some concerned, others curious. A few barely concealing their hostility. These people had worked alongside me for years. Yet how many of them had been aware of Richard and Lucy's schemes? "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "You've probably seen the news by now, but you deserve to hear the full story directly from me." I paused, scanning the room. "And some of you may have stories of your own to share." For the next hour, I laid out everything. The financial manipulation, the planned corporate takeover, the web of lies that had entangled our company. But as I spoke, I watched reactions carefully, particularly when I mentioned the Hamptons development project. Mark Davidson, our head of development, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He'd been Richard's right-hand man on that project, and now, looking at him, I remembered something else. He'd been on vacation in the Hamptons that same weekend 3 years ago. "There's one more thing," I said, pulling out the photograph. "This was just brought to my attention. Mark, would you care to explain why you told me you'd never met Zachary Davies when he's clearly in this photo?" The room fell silent. Mark's face went pale. Zachary Davies was the Hong Kong investor whose mysterious withdrawal had supposedly tanked the Hamptons project. I can explain," Mark stuttered. But before he could continue, Lisa from accounting stood up. "I think it's time we all came clean," she said, her voice shaking. "I've kept quiet for too long, but..." She pulled out a USB drive. I have copies of all the real transactions from that project. Richard and Lucy weren't just stealing from the company, they were using it to launder money for Davies' organization. The revelation hit the room like a thunderbolt. Suddenly, other voices joined in. Employees who'd noticed discrepancies but had been afraid to speak up, others who'd been pressured into silence, and some who'd been unwitting participants in Richard and Lucy's schemes. As I listened to each story, pieces of a larger puzzle began falling into place. The Hamptons project hadn't failed. It had succeeded exactly as Richard had planned, generating millions in laundered funds while appearing to be a legitimate business loss. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. Found something in Lucy's private safe? Meeting in 20? But before I could reply, Janet rushed in, her face ashen. Megan, Richard's been released on bail, and he's here, in the lobby. The room erupted in whispers. Through the glass walls, I could see Richard standing by the reception desk, still wearing his designer suit, though it looked considerably less crisp after his night in jail. Our eyes met across the distance. Should I call security? Janet asked. I stood up, straightening my blazer. No. It's time Richard and I had an honest conversation. I turned to the room. Mark, Lisa, don't leave. We'll need your statements. Everyone else, thank you for your honesty today. We'll be making some significant changes around here, starting now. As I walked toward the lobby, I felt the weight of the photograph in my pocket. Richard thought he was here to negotiate, but he didn't know about Davies, or the laundering, or the evidence Tom had found in Lucy's safe. He didn't know that his carefully constructed house of cards was about to come crashing down in ways he hadn't imagined. But as I approached him, I noticed something in his expression. Not the arrogance I expected, but fear, real fear. And clutched in his hand was an envelope identical to the one that had contained my photograph. Megan, he said, his voice hoarse. We need to talk. Not about us, not about the company. There's something bigger going on and we're all in danger. Behind him, through the lobby's glass doors, I saw a black car pull up and two familiar figures step out. The man from the Hamptons photo, Zachary Davies, and beside him, wearing a satisfied smile, was Lucy. The lobby felt suddenly airless as I watched Lucy and Zachary Davies approach the building. Richard's hand gripped my arm, an intimacy he hadn't dared in months. My office, I said quietly, pulling away from his touch. Now. As we walked, I sent a quick text to Janet. Stall Lucy and Davies, Security Protocol Delta. We'd implemented new security measures after discovering the initial betrayal. Measures that Lucy didn't know about. Once inside my office, formerly Richard's, I turned to face my husband. He looked smaller somehow, his confident facade cracked. The envelope in his hands trembled slightly. Show me, I said, nodding to the envelope. He pulled out a photograph similar to mine, but this one was different. It showed Zachary Davies in what appeared to be a private club, surrounded by several prominent business figures, including two members of our board who hadn't resigned. The date stamp was from last week. It's not just money laundering, Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. Chen's organization. They're using legitimate businesses to hide something much bigger. I thought I could handle it, control it for our benefit, but... Our benefit? I interrupted, anger flaring. You destroyed our marriage, betrayed our company, and collaborated with criminals, all for our benefit? I did it to protect you. He exploded, then immediately lowered his voice, glancing nervously at the door. Davies approached me 3 years ago. He had information about your father's debt, about what really happened to his company before he died. He threatened to expose everything. My father's face flashed in my mind. His proud smile the day he handed me my first business textbook. His devastation when his company collapsed. The questions that had always surrounded his sudden heart attack. You're lying, I said, but uncertainty crept into my voice. Check your phone, Richard replied. Tom should have found the proof by now. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A message from Tom with an attachment. Scanned documents from Lucy's safe. My hands shook as I read them. Loan agreements, threatening letters, surveillance photos of my father in his final days, all connecting back to Davies' organization. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, hating how my voice cracked. Because you would have fought them, Richard said softly. Like you're fighting now. I thought if I could play their game, keep them happy with the laundered money, they'd leave us alone. But Lucy, he trailed off. Lucy saw an opportunity. I finished for him. The pieces were falling into place. She used your attempt to protect me as leverage to get what she really wanted. Control of the company. Richard nodded miserably. She's been working with Davies from the beginning. The divorce, the asset transfers. It was all her idea. She promised Davies complete control of our legitimate business networks if he helped her take you down. A knock at the door made us both jump. Janet entered, her face tense. They're in the main conference room. Lucy's calling an emergency board meeting. She's claiming some sort of emergency shareholder authority. The resignations, I realized. The board members who quit. She's replacing them with Davies's people. I turned to Richard. That's why you came forward. She's cutting you out too. She's cutting everyone out, he replied. Megan, Davies's organization doesn't just want to use our company. They want to replicate what they did to your father's business. They'll strip everything valuable and leave us all implicated in their crimes. My mind raced. In my purse was a small recorder that had captured every word of Richard's confession. In my safe was evidence of years of financial crimes. In my email was a drafted press release about the money laundering investigation. I had all the weapons I needed to bring them down, but using them would mean exposing everything, including my father's connection to Davies. Mrs. Walker. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Davies is requesting your presence in the conference room. He says to remind you that time is running out. I looked at Richard, seeing for the first time not the man who had betrayed me, but someone as trapped as I was. What's in the conference room, Richard? What aren't you telling me? His face went completely white. The real reason I married you, he whispered. The secret your father died to protect. Before he could continue, my phone rang. Tom's number. But when I answered, it wasn't Tom's voice I heard. Lucy's laugh came through the speaker, cold and triumphant. Time to face the music, dear sister, she said. By the way, your friend Tom is very interested in the contents of your father's old safe, the one you never knew about. Shall we discuss it all in the conference room? I ended the call, my mind whirling. Richard reached for my hand, but I stepped back. Don't, I said. You've lost the right to protect me, but you can help me fight. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in years, I saw the man I had originally fallen in love with. What's your plan? I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd hoped never to use. First, we're going to save Tom. Then we're going to finish what my father started. I straightened my jacket, feeling the weight of the recorder in my pocket. But Richard, when this is over, we're done. Forever. As we walked toward the conference room, I couldn't shake the feeling that behind that door waited not just Lucy and Davies, but answers to questions I'd been afraid to ask for years. Questions about my father, about my marriage, and about the real reason everyone seemed so interested in a safe I'd never known existed. The walk to the conference room felt like entering another dimension. Through the glass walls, I could see Lucy standing at the head of the table, my spot just hours ago, while Zachary Davies sat calmly beside her. Tom was there too, looking tense but unharmed, a laptop open in front of him. Remember, Richard whispered as we approached the door, everything they think they know about your father's safe is based on Lucy's information. She never saw inside it. I paused, my hand on the door handle. And you did? No, he replied. Only your father and his attorney knew the contents, and his attorney died 2 months after your father. The conference room fell silent as we entered. Lucy's triumphant smile flickered slightly when she saw Richard beside me. Brother dear, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I didn't expect you to join us. Clearly, Richard replied, taking a seat next to Tom. I remained standing, studying Zachary Davies. In person, he was younger than I'd expected, probably in his early 40s, with an expensive suit and an air of absolute confidence. Mr. Davies, I said, I believe you knew my father. Miss Walker, he replied, his accent slightly British. Please, sit. We have much to discuss about Theodore Walker's legacy. The way he said my father's name made my skin crawl, but I kept my face neutral as I sat down. You mean his debt to your organization? Davies smiled. Is that what Richard told you? That your father was in debt to us? He laughed softly. My dear, your father didn't owe us money. We owed him something far more valuable. Silence. Lucy cleared her throat impatiently. We're not here to discuss ancient history. Megan, we have a proposition for you. One that can benefit everyone in this room. Everyone except Tom? I asked, nodding toward her husband. Tom made his choice, Lucy replied coldly. But you still have options. Sign over your controlling shares, agree to a quick, quiet divorce from Richard, and walk away with a very generous settlement. We'll even keep your father's name clean. I noticed Tom's fingers moving slightly on his laptop keyboard, a subtle motion that might have gone unnoticed if I hadn't been looking for it. Our IT team had installed a new security system last week, one that could be activated with a specific keystroke combination. Before I consider your offer, I said carefully, buying time, I'd like to know what you think is in my father's safe. Documents, Davies replied immediately. Proof of certain irregular business practices conducted by my predecessors. Your father was very thorough in his documentation. And this documentation, I continued. You believe it's in a safe I never knew about? Lucy's smile widened. Don't play innocent, Megan. We know Theodore told you everything before he died. The safe's location, the combination... Interesting, I interrupted. That you think my father had time to tell me anything before his heart attack, especially since I was in London when he died. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Lucy's face. Davies's expression remained unchanged, but his fingers tightened slightly on his armrest. The truth is, I continued, standing slowly, I did find out about a safe, but not from my father. I pulled out my phone and played a recording, Richard's earlier confession about Davies's organization and their threats. What are you doing? Lucy hissed, but Davies raised a hand to silence her. The safe you're so interested in? I went on. I found it 3 months ago, hidden in the false bottom of my father's old desk. The desk Richard insisted we keep in storage all these years. Now it was Richard's turn to look shocked. You found it? But I searched. You searched the obvious places, I said. But you forgot that before I was your wife, before I was a businesswoman, I was Theodore Walker's daughter, and he taught me everything about hidden compartments and secret codes. Tom's fingers moved again on his laptop. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the conference room's security lights flash green, signal that everything was being recorded and transmitted to our lawyers. The safe contained exactly what you're looking for, Mr. Davies, I said, turning to face him. Every document, every transaction, every piece of evidence about your organization's activities. But those documents aren't in the safe anymore. Chen's calm facade cracked slightly. Where are they? The same place I sent copies of everything else. Richard's confession, the money laundering evidence, Lucy's embezzlement records, and the proof that your organization was behind my father's death. They're all with a very secure, very public dead man's switch. Lucy stood up so quickly her chair toppled backward. You're bluffing. Am I? I smiled, channeling every ounce of confidence my father had taught me. Check your phone, Lucy. Check the news. Check your offshore accounts. It's amazing what can happen in the 15 minutes it took us to walk to this conference room. Tom turned his laptop around, showing multiple news websites running breaking stories about international money laundering investigations. Davies's phone began buzzing incessantly. You see, I said, sitting back down calmly. While we've been talking, everything my father worked to expose, everything you tried to hide, everything you threatened and killed for, it's all becoming public. Right now. The conference room doors opened, and Janet entered with 2 familiar faces, the financial crimes investigators who had arrested Richard. But this time, they weren't here for my husband. Mr. Davies, one of them said, we have some questions about your recent banking activities. As Davies and Lucy were led away, I turned to Richard. You tried to protect me by playing their game. My father tried to protect me by gathering evidence. But neither of you realized that I never needed protection. I needed the truth. Tom closed his laptop, looking exhausted but relieved. What happens now? I looked around the conference room, where my father had once sat, where I had built my career, where so many lies had been told and truths hidden. Now, we rebuild, but this time, with complete transparency. Megan, Richard said softly, about us. There is no us, I replied, but without anger. There's only the truth we should have shared years ago. As I watched Lucy and Davies being escorted out of the building, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. But I also felt something else. A key in my pocket, one I'd found in my father's safe, with a note attached that I hadn't opened yet, because some truths I was learning needed to wait for the right moment. And that moment had finally arrived. The sun was setting by the time I finally returned to my father's old house. After years of keeping it exactly as he'd left it, today felt like the right time for change. The key in my pocket seemed to grow heavier with each step up the familiar porch stairs. Tom had offered to come with me, but this was something I needed to do alone. The events of the day kept replaying in my mind. Davies and Lucy being led away by investigators, Richard's quiet departure from the office, the barrage of calls from press and shareholders that Janet was expertly fielding. Inside, the house smelled of old books and memories. I walked directly to my father's study, where his presence still felt strongest. The note from the safe was worn from being carried in my pocket, but I could feel the crisp edge of another paper inside it, something that had waited years to be read. Settling into his old leather chair, I finally opened it. My dearest Megan, if you're reading this, you've found the safe, which means you've also likely discovered the truth about Davies' organization and their hold over our business community. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you everything before my death, but I needed to protect you until you were ready to protect yourself. The key enclosed isn't just a key to a lock. It's a key to understanding why I pushed you so hard to learn every aspect of business, why I insisted you work from the ground up, why I taught you to look beyond the obvious. There's a safety deposit box at First National, Box 1847. Everything you need to know is there. But more importantly, there's something you need to understand. Richard didn't marry you just because Davies' organization ordered it. He chose you because even then, he saw what I saw, a woman of extraordinary strength and intelligence. His mistake was trying to dim your light instead of letting it shine. I kept evidence of Davies' operations not just to expose them, but to ensure you would have the weapons you needed when the time came. The records in the safety deposit box will help you understand the full scope of their influence, and more importantly, how to dismantle it completely. I'm proud of you, Megan. Not just for what you've uncovered, but for who you've become. Remember, the truth isn't just about exposing lies. It's about choosing what to build in their place. All my love, Dad. My hands shook as I folded the letter. A lifetime of questions suddenly had answers, but they weren't the answers I'd expected. My father hadn't been a victim. He'd been a strategist, playing a long game to protect not just me, but countless others from Davies' corrupt network. My phone buzzed. A text from Janet. Lucy's asking to talk. Says she has information about other members of Davies' network. Should I arrange a meeting? I thought about Lucy, about how her hunger for power had blinded her to the fact that she was just another pawn in Davies' game. Not today, I replied. Let her think about her choices for a while. Standing up, I walked to the window where my father used to stand, looking out over the garden he'd loved. The safety deposit box could wait until morning. Tonight was for understanding the past and planning the future. Another text came through, this time from Tom. Board members are calling. They want to know if you'll stay on as CEO. I smiled, thinking of all the times my father had told me to trust my instincts. The company needed more than just new leadership. It needed complete transformation. And I had inherited not just my father's strength, but his vision for something better. Tell them I have some conditions, I typed back, starting with a full audit and restructuring of all departments. Setting my phone down, I noticed something else in my father's study. A photo I'd never really looked at before. It showed him standing in front of the company building on its opening day. But in the background, barely visible, was a young Zachary Davies with his father. 3 generations of secrets, about to come to light. The final text of the evening came from an unexpected source. Richard, I know it doesn't change anything, but I'm ready to tell the whole truth about everything. No more protection, no more secrets. As I locked up the house, I felt different, lighter, stronger, more certain. Tomorrow, I would open that safety deposit box and face whatever truths it held. Tomorrow, I would begin rebuilding not just a company, but a legacy. But tonight, standing on the porch where I'd spent so many evenings with my father, I finally understood what he'd been preparing me for all along. It was never about the business, or the money, or even justice. It was about having the courage to face the truth, no matter how complex or painful it might be. The key in my pocket no longer felt heavy. It felt like a beginning. The morning sun streamed through the windows of First National Bank as I approached the safety deposit vault. The events of the past few days felt almost surreal. The confrontation, Davies's arrest, Lucy's downfall. Yet here I was, about to uncover the final piece of my father's legacy. The bank manager led me to box 1847, leaving me alone in the private viewing room. My hands were steady as I inserted the key, but my heart raced as I lifted the lid. Inside was a single USB drive and another envelope, thicker than the last. The envelope contained detailed records of Davies's organization's activities spanning 3 decades, including connections to prominent business figures I'd known my entire life. But it was the last document that made me catch my breath. A photograph of my father with Richard's father and Davies's father, all 3 men looking young and determined, standing in front of what would become our company building. My phone buzzed. Janet, with an update about Lucy. She's agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation, says she wants to make things right. Tell her I'll meet with her next week, I replied. After the board meeting. The USB drive contained something even more valuable than evidence. It held my father's personal journals, documenting his journey from discovering the corruption to planning its exposure. The final entry was dated the day before his death. Megan will find this when she's ready. I've watched her grow into a woman of incredible strength and insight. Richard sees it too, though his loyalty to his family's interests blinds him to the right path. I hope one day he'll find the courage to stand beside her rather than in front of her. But regardless of his choice, I know my daughter will fulfill the promise we made 30 years ago, to build something that lasts, something true. A knock at the door interrupted my reading. Richard stood there looking uncertain. The bank manager said I might find you here, he said quietly. I have something you need to see. He handed me a folder containing his signed confession, not just about the recent events, but about everything. His father's involvement with Davies's organization, the arranged marriage, the years of manipulation. But there was something else too. Evidence of how he'd secretly protected company assets from Davies's complete control, creating a safety net I hadn't known about. I know it doesn't make up for anything, he said, but I wanted you to know that some part of me was always on your side. I just wasn't brave enough to show it. Looking at him now, I felt neither love nor hate, just understanding. Thank you for this, I said, closing the folder. It will help with the reconstruction. Megan, he hesitated. What my father and Davies's father did to yours. I should have told you years ago. You should have, I agreed. But that's the past. I'm interested in the future. Leaving the bank, I headed straight to the office. The board meeting was in an hour, and I knew exactly what needed to be done. Janet met me in the lobby with an update. Our stock had stabilized, key clients were staying, and employee morale was actually improving in the wake of transparency. In the boardroom, faces both old and new looked to me expectantly. Tom sat to my right, his quiet strength a reminder that loyalty still existed in this world. The empty seats where Davies's allies had once sat now held people I trusted, professionals chosen for their integrity as much as their expertise. Before we begin, I said, opening my laptop, I want to share something with you. My father left a blueprint, not just for exposing corruption, but for building something better. Today, we start fresh. Over the next 2 hours, I outlined my vision for the company's future. Complete transparency in all operations. A new ethical investment division. Programs to support small businesses affected by corporate corruption. And most importantly, a foundation in my father's name to fight financial fraud. As the meeting concluded, Janet handed me one final message. From Lucy. Inside was a USB drive of her own, containing evidence against others in Davies's network, along with a simple note. I'm sorry. I forgot what it meant to be a sister. That evening, I returned to my father's house. But this time, instead of being surrounded by ghosts of the past, I felt only possibility. In the study, I sat at his desk and began to write. Dear Dad, today, I finally understood what you were trying to teach me all along. Success isn't measured by what we acquire or achieve, but by the truths we're willing to face and the changes we're brave enough to make. The company you built will become what you always dreamed it could be. But more importantly, I've become who you always knew I was. Someone who stands in her own light. Love, Megan. 6 months later, as I stood at the podium announcing our company's new direction, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass. A woman who had faced betrayal and emerged stronger, who had uncovered truth and chosen to build something new from it. The reporters asked about Davies's sentencing, about Lucy's plea deal, about Richard's cooperation with authorities. But I spoke instead about the future, about transparency and transformation, about how sometimes the greatest test of strength isn't in fighting battles, but in choosing which ones are worth fighting. And later that night, as I locked up my office, still my father's desk, but now in a brighter space with windows overlooking the city, I smiled at how life comes full circle. On my desk sat a new photo. Me, standing exactly where my father had stood 30 years ago, ready to build something that would last. The truth I had learned isn't just about exposing lies. It's about creating something honest in their place. And that's exactly what I intended to do. One decision, one day, one truth at a time.